Welcome to Haggie Reads for You on Wolf Spirit Radio. Colleen, Haggie, reads children's stories for the wee ones up to the teens. She also reads books for grown-ups. Tune in, kick back, relax, and listen in. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
Hi everyone, it's Colleen, and it is Tuesday, May the 3rd, 2016, and this is Haggie Reads for You on Haggie Shack Radio, simulcast to Wolf Spirit Radio. And today I'm going to pick up where I left off last week with Children of the Law of One, The Lost Teachings of Atlantis. Wait, back up a second. Fully celibate? It seems like you either are or you aren't. I'll explain some other time. Anyway, some of us do call the adept female monks mothers, however, but it's because they kind of become like universal mothers when they are enlightened. It's more of a term of endearment than a title. Like I said, titles are really unimportant. You could call them sister or chum, for all they care. In the next few weeks, I developed quite a crush on Anastasia. I'd never had a woman feel so loving towards me, and because of what I was accustomed to, as far as male-female relationships go, I thought that her affection meant that she liked me in a more romantic sense also. I wasn't used to being loved so dearly, without it meaning that she wanted to be with me. I didn't understand pure, real love yet, and I didn't have the consciousness to respond to her without selfish possessiveness. So it came as quite a shock and disappointment to me when I found out that she was not interested in me that way. It turned out that she actually already had a mate, that she had a very good and close relationship. She was just a loving, caring person. Just a loving, caring person. I said it as if it were common. Women who are truly spiritual, kind, and caring typically have quite a problem with men thinking about them the way I did with Anastasia. Actually lusting after them would be a more accurate way to put it. Not just in a sexual sense, although that's certainly involved, but in a wanting their attention and affections way. So you might want to learn from my mistake and take some helpful advice. If you ever meet such a special, truly spiritual woman, don't make the same mistake. Just because a woman is warm, kind, and caring toward you doesn't mean she wants to be your possession or have romance or sex with you. This goes for all women, but it is especially true for women of advanced spiritual development. Just take the love you get. It's wonderful to even ever receive such love. And don't try to possess it for yourself alone, or make that woman the center of your life. That's a role only God can fulfill. Bringing my story up to date in summary. As the days went by, I slowly adjusted to my new surroundings and began to absorb what I could. Years later, I finally graduated. Now, as was prophesied within our order centuries ago, this book was written to present the essential ancient teachings to the public in an unadulterated, clear, easily understandable fashion. Along with this, I will include some of my personal experiences, both ones that I had while I was a young novice student on my road to change, and a few of those that I had later in life, after I became an initiate. That way you can get a little glimpse of things from both sides, the teachers and the students. Chapter 3. Sources and Descendants of the Teachings, including definitions of God, basics, and prerequisites. The teachings. To you they may be loss, found and misplaced, earth-shaking, new or fancy, basic, old and simple. It matters not. They are timeless, useful, and invaluable. This book tells several stories other than my personal one. It tells a story of creation, a story of a long-forgotten history, and a story of a spiritual tradition that gave birth to many legends. But primarily, the book accurately reveals the teachings that, without which, none of these stories would exist or matter. Like some of the stories, while these teachings are part of ancient history, they can also be keys to a promising future. Some of the teachings of the children of the Law of One, presented here, have been around a very long time, as far back as Atlantis, and some not so long. The unadulterated teachings of the children of the Law of One have never been directly made public before, but some of them are the sources of many other teachings that have been made public. So you may already know certain things you're going to read in this book, yet some of it will still be new information. Other readers may find that much or all of it will be new to them. Obviously, if you are already enlightened, reading this book would just be a waste of your time, because its purpose is to help those who aren't enlightened become enlightened. Since the word enlightenment has many meanings, though, I should probably define what we mean by it. We call someone enlightened who, 1, has had a final death experience of the selfish separate self, thus bursting the illusion of separation from everything, God. This is similar to a near-death experience, but is deliberately cultivated through spiritual training, ego-busting. It is also fully experienced rather than near, and doesn't require nearly dying physically. 2, has realized and permanently returned to a state of absolute oneness with the universal spirit, God. 3, is always living in harmony with the universe and doing the will of God as a servant of God. Always lives in a state of unselfish love, number 4. All of the above are one and the same thing, and the change takes place at the same time. If you haven't achieved that yet, then even if you think you know it all, this book could still help you if you will just check your ego at the door and actually apply the teachings rather than just letting them be more knowledge you can scan into your brain. But generally, regardless of your familiarity with the teachings presented here, the book can offer a sort of oasis of fellowship and inspiration to anyone who feels inside that kindness, compassion, and harmlessness. Not hurting anyone or anything are more important than any belief of any kind. Descendants. One of the first questions I asked an elder monk was about Buddhism. Raja, why is this monastery located here, in a country so full of Buddhists and Buddhist monasteries? Several reasons, which we will discuss soon. Are we related to Buddhism in some way? Buddhism is a beloved relative of ours, and thus some of the teachings are the same. But this is not just the case with Buddhism. We are also related to the Christian, Jewish, Islamic, and many, many other religions. Although some religions are almost unrecognizable from their origins now, almost any religion that speaks of one God, regardless of the name they call God, is somehow related. Why is that? Most people consider such religions conflicting, not relatives, and especially Buddhism, a beloved relative? The teachings and heritage of the children of the Law of One predate Buddhism and all other religions. They are originally from teachers or teachings of the children of the Law of One, and those who somehow became one with the universal spirit, the one God, in some other fashion. But keep in mind that while you may find bits of the children's teachings here and there in many other spiritual traditions and religions, they are also unique unto themselves. Our teachings are the source, the roots of the many branches of the tree, and unlike some of the branches, the roots are still alive, still totally pure and uncorrupted. They are like the original roots of the grapevine, from which all the different varieties of wine grapes eventually develop from. The teachings that you're going to hear about and read here in the monastery's libraries are the original and presented from the pure, direct lineage. Although, keep in mind that any teachings, including these, aren't as important as simply applying unselfish love, kindness, and compassion in your life, regardless of the source. This is where many have gone wrong, making the teachings, or the leaders, or the religions more important than the point of what they were really for in the first place. So will we learn only the pure original teachings? No. Our knowledge has been accumulating for ages, and you will learn these too. In fact, some of the knowledge is about our existence before our time on earth, and these too you will learn in time. But we don't just present the children's teachings here. You will also learn the ways and beliefs of all the world's religions. Why do that if we have the pure and original source of all other teachings here? Other religious teachings and cultures are taught for the purpose of revealing the common threads of unity and truth that could be found woven through diverse religions, and to give teachers of the children of the Law of One more of an ability to understand and communicate with anyone they might need to, regardless of their culture or religion. Also, because of that, there have been other monasteries of the children in various parts of the world. Another time I also asked Gabriel some questions about our monasteries and their relationship to Buddhism. The children's monasteries, though few in number, were the oldest in many religions of the world, including Tibet. Buddhism, as a separate path, didn't appear until thousands of years after the children had established monasteries in the East. Buddhism, like most religions, was in fact originally one of the offspring or branches of the children. It developed from the effects and teachings of adept monks of the children of the Law of One. These monks wandered the regions throughout the area and taught the local people there and throughout much of what is now called Asia and the Orient. Various teachers of the children, who often remained anonymous and never spoke of the secret source of their true lineage or home, became known as Buddhas. Did you know there was more than one Buddha? No, I thought Buddha was Buddha, just like Jesus was Jesus. That is not so. There were more than one, just as there were many Zoroasters and many Saint Germains, and why? Various reasons. I will explain some other time, but that is not the important subject of our conversation right now. Is that why there are different Buddhist traditions and even variations in their teachings, I ask? Partly. After the various adepts left, Buddhist religions and many varieties sprung up all over Asia as a result, and modified in different ways. What about Zen? Zen is often considered an offshoot of Buddhism, and also considered to be a shortcut to enlightenment. But there are no real shortcuts, in the sense that the same things must be experienced, and the death of the selfish, separate self ultimately faced and transcended. And while it has become intertwined with Buddhism, the roots of Zen were from one of our initiates by the name of Zend, which you will undoubtedly read about here when it is time, because you have a connection to Zend that you will find most interesting and enlightening. Author's note: that statement related to an incarnation of the being also known as Jesus. Zen is our offspring, as is Buddhism, Christianity, and Judaism, and Islam. So you say Buddha was a Christian and Jesus was Buddhist? Yes, but only in a way. You aren't getting it, are you? Think about what you know of, which is quite limited at this time, of the laws of Buddha and Jesus. Do you see anything that conflicts? Or do you see examples of love and compassion, indications of similarity? So what do you think the source of these paths that they spawned, the source of their teachings, the source of their examples, if not the same understanding, or the same God? You're saying these all have the same source? Of course. And notice, they all teach of a oneness God. Yet they may disagree over names or particulars, and most importantly, they believe in godness, goodness, compassion, unselfish love as the way of life. So they all came from the children of the Law of One. That makes so much sense of so many things that I couldn't understand before. And this particular monastery housed the roots of other beliefs and teachings for several reasons. Even though well hidden from those few who had seen it, they were not of the order legends were born. Even amongst the offspring traditions and religions, they told of a paradise, a beautiful heavenly community that existed among the great mountains. But it is prophesied that the land of the teachers is to be desecrated and destroyed. It has begun. We only have so long. It is just a matter of when, not if. But it matters not. Which is more important, a container or that which the container contains? Nature, secrecy, and other methods did protect the monastery, for quite a while longer at least. While countless Buddhist monasteries were destroyed, our monastery remained undiscovered for a while longer, for as long as was necessary in the great scheme of things. An infinite lineage. As I assume you've already gathered, when I first began to learn the history of the order, I was just amazed. I had never heard of any religion, spiritual tradition, or culture with such an extensive lineage, pure lineage, or broad influence. The prehistory and history of many religions can be obscure and have a great deal of unknowns about their past and true origins. But the children record a history that stretches all the way back from the creation of life in the universe to the present. And while some religions developed from a primitive, ignorant society and have a lineage of bloody and barbaric intolerance, even the children's earliest history on earth records them as compassionate, tolerant, highly evolved beings living in a sophisticated civilization. Where and when did all that start? Did what start? I guess I mean, when did the children of the Law of One begin? On Earth? Yes. The earthly lineage actually begins with the time of Atlantis. The children of the Law of One was the spiritual order of those in Atlantis who lived a spiritual life, those who were compassionate, kind, harmless, and wanted to maintain oneness with God. So where does this monastery in Tibet come into the picture? When Atlantis was on the verge of final destruction from the great upheavals Branches of the children, having read the signs, went to various places on earth. The main group went with the children's Grand Master, taught, to Egypt, to continue the great work. Author's note: the great work he was referring to will be explained later. After many years in Egypt, that particular branch of the children went to Tibet. These Atlantean children of the Law of One, including the Grand Master, were the ancestral founders of our monastery in Tibet. So, if everyone mainly hibernated here at this monastery for so many years, how did they influence or start other religions? All through commonly known human history, the children of the Law of One continued to maintain their center in Tibet. But some of its teachers made the great sacrifice of leaving their brothers and sisters in the monastery to help people in the outside world. They humbly and lovingly traveled throughout the world, bringing light into the darkness of the ages. The teachings and influence of these children have become the foundations of many other paths, religions, and legends. It all made sense of so many things about religions, philosophies, history, and spiritual teachings that never quite made sense to me before. You probably won't even believe it if I told you of all the religions, cultures, arts, and science that have been created based on these outside world teachers who live disguised lives, so I won't. But you can think about it and draw your own conclusions. Redefining God and Love. First, let me cover some important ground, things that I learned in my earliest days at the monastery that will give you a frame of reference. So before we delve deeper into the teachings, let's clarify the meanings of a couple of words, concepts, that will be used a great deal in this book. God and love, and in a different way than you may have heard them used before. Both terms and concepts can mean many different things to many different people. Love. In my first days and months at the monastery, I attended courses given by elder monks. In one of my World Human Concept and Terminology courses, which was given by the elder monk Raja, we began covering the teachings of the various types of emotions that people often lump together and call love. Love can mean sex. We made love. Love can mean you really like something. I love my new car. Love can mean the pleasure or thrill you get from someone you have a romantic relationship. I love Nadia. Or love can mean compassion, kindness, caring, giving, sharing. That's the kind of love that brings true happiness, inner peace. It's the kind of love we all really need and need to give. It's also the kind of love that would make the world a far better place. So if we wish to focus on developing this kind of love, we must clearly delineate it and give it a name. Thus, we call it unselfish love, because that is what it is. God. Raja went on to define the various ways the people of the world see and understand God. God is a very abstract and difficult thing for the human mind to fathom. To paraphrase the ancient teaching, the God I'm talking about cannot be talked about. It means that God is really impossible to explain or truly understand intellectually. But with that in mind, I will endeavor to explain the unexplainable. The big guy in the sky concept of God. People have often personalized or humanized the concept of God. Whether consciously or subconsciously, many people think of God as having a human-like appearance, a great big man with long silver hair and beard that lives somewhere out there beyond the sky in heaven. That has always bothered me. Why do people think of God that way? I said. There are several reasons why people think of God in this way. Partly, it is due to how hard it is to grasp such an infinite and abstract concept as God. But unfortunately, sometimes this human-like idea of God was deliberately fostered as 1. A means to gain wealth and power over the masses, 2. A means to justify cruel or horrible things some men wanted to do, like war, and 3. A means of propagating sexism, or 4. All of the above. Unfortunately, with that kind of human-like conception of God, also comes assigning human-like personality traits to God, and some of them are very human, like negative personality traits, such as anger, jealousy, and vengefulness. The followers of many different religions have their own personalized versions of a humanized God. Some versions of God have similar personality traits, but there are various differences. Subsequently, the rules that people believe He has given for us to obey are sometimes similar and sometimes very different. Is that a problem, though? Why can't people all have their own ideas of God if it makes them happy or fits into their own cultures? I asked. They can. They're welcome to it. We don't care about what name of God or idea of God they believe in. If it helps them become better, kinder people, that's our only concern. But think about it. People will go to war because their personalized version of God is different than someone else's. And of course, each side in the war always believe God is on their side. Understanding the universality and oneness of God eliminates this and many other tragic acts. You, who will be teachers in various parts of the world, will be confronted with this constantly, and you need to understand the various concepts of personalized gods in order for you to reveal that there is more to God that goes beyond what they think. Many things about various personalized gods just don't make sense. This includes both the things God does and the things God doesn't do, allows. For instance, animals and innocent children are suffering on this planet. Why? If you accept a human-like version of God, why doesn't He put a stop to this? Many people who have limited views of God can understand this when you explain it to them, as long as they have the slightest open mind and the Spirit of God is present in you when you explain it to them. Now, let's consider God in a different, unhuman way. Good God. The children of the law of one teach that God is all, and includes all. It is the one that includes the many. It is within us, without us, and we are individual parts of the whole of it. While many religions have similar to identical concepts of the one God in their scriptures, they may still use the idea that their God is different from the others, as a reason for war or killing. One of the problems is that while many religions do teach that God is one, is all things, is everywhere, etc., they still propagate the concept of the human-like God in the sky, and thus the religious followers still seem to think of God that way. They also sometimes teach that it is only their religion that has the one God, rather than that God is the one, the oneness of all. But some religions don't teach that, do they? Even if the religion isn't propagating the humanized God concept, people still usually think that way. I will explain why in a moment, but first, let's look at the consequences of thinking of God in a humanized fashion. regardless as to why they do. Unfortunately, the humanized God idea naturally lends to thinking of God as an individual of sorts. Then a person's or a religion's God can be given all kinds of personal traits that either the individual or the religion wants God to have in order to justify their human behavior. But that whole idea goes against the God in everything, everywhere concept, because if God is thought of as an individual, it also leaves us with the impression that he is separate from us and the universe. But if there is one God, which is all, and is everywhere at all times, etc., it can't be separate from us or the universe. But it can't be an individual in any normal interpretation of the word, other than if you consider everything in the universe, the entirety of the universe itself, as one universe, and in some sense, then, as an individual. So God is an individual also? In some sense. Let's contemplate that for a moment. We know the universe is one huge, probably infinite something that is everywhere and everything, all existence as we know it, etc. Even our bodies are comprised of stardust, the stuff of the universe. Doesn't it stand to reason, then, that the one God must also be the very universe itself? And if that is so, and there is some sort of design, consciousness, and energy that pervades the entire universe, all of creation, wouldn't that be God's spirit and consciousness? Thus, the consciousness of God is the consciousness of the universe. Universal consciousness, then, is a consciousness that is one and the same as God's, and thus the Spirit of God, the life force that is all of creation, is the Spirit of the universe, the universal Spirit. Once, all humans had the consciousness of their oneness with the universal Spirit, and that is why you are here, to regain that universal consciousness and oneness with God. Then you will be the lamps to help others regain their lost way also. So for clarity, in the majority of this book, God will often be referred to as the universal Spirit, and sometimes as the One. It helps clarify that when we are speaking of God, we are not referring to the big guy in the sky concept of God. But even though using the words universal Spirit helps prevent the confusion with the humanized God concept, the term God will still be used from time to time throughout the book. When it is, just keep in mind what that means to us. Back to my course with Raja. To summarize, the children of the Law of One teach that the universal Spirit, rather than being an individual as we know it, is a multiplicity that is one. It comprises and is all things in the entire universe together as one. It is the beingness, energy, essence, and life force that is everywhere and everything in the universe, including us, including nature, and including the universe itself, and it has a consciousness. Also included is part of the one universal Spirit, and the oneness that is the universal Spirit is a hierarchy of spiritual beings who exist on many different levels. You might think of them as angels, guardian angels, ascended masters, adepts or saints who have passed on, etc. Being free from the limitations of physical life, they exist in spiritual form. and share the same consciousness as the universal spirit, universal consciousness. They are consciously part of, one with, and an aspect of the universal spirit. Hierarchical beings thus act in harmony with the will of the universal spirit, as if they were arms or extensions of it. Yet, they are somewhat related to us, and thus close to us also, so they are links to the entirety of the universal spirit, who can help guide us and have certain influences in our lives. Is that like what some people call guardian angels? Yes, but it is just one of the many beings that form the link of the hierarchy. And the universal spirit is also comprised of this great link of oneness. As you study the ancient biblical texts in the library, you will find that an early name for God in some of them, or perhaps I should say God was referred to in some of them, as Elohim. The word Elohim is plural, and both masculine and feminine. Thus it includes the concept of a hierarchy of spiritual beings that also comprise God, and insinuates that God is neither an individual person nor a he. This also leaves room to include all creation, all beings, including humans, as being part of God. Thus, the Elohim concept of God is similar to what the Atlantean children of the Law of One teach about the universal spirit, and you may find this helpful in your work someday. The source and purpose of the teachings. The teachings in this book weren't created for the purpose of being enshrined or worshipped, nor to influence the reader to worship any religion, book, or religious leader. These ancient teachings are thus non-denominational and or omni-denominational. They are not from or by any religion, and they are not religious teachings. Yet they do teach about the universal spirit, our relationship to it, and our place in the universe. It is our hope that publishing this book will help people in several ways: to regain their connection with the universal spirit, to regain their place in the order of things in the universe, to become free from that which creates suffering for themselves and others, and to become unselfishly loving, compassionate, kind, and harmless. The teachings of the Atlantean children of the Law of One were developed by beings who were one with God and the universe, so to speak. You could call them angels incarnate, enlightened people, fools, masters, children, true teachers, saints, whatever, it doesn't matter. Regardless of what you choose to call them, they had universal consciousness, and thus an awareness that included the spiritual realms, which permeate and are the foundation of all physical things in the universe. This high or spiritual consciousness gave them a great understanding of everything in life, including us, God, and universal laws and truths. We will also refer to these laws and truths as universal principles. The teachings are thus reflections of these greater understandings of the big picture, and present universal principles within them. They are a kind of the facts of life in the universe that most people have lost touch with, and are thus living out of harmony with. These universal principles are also aspects of the universal spirit. They are also things we once knew and were aware of, because we also were once higher consciousness beings. But that was in the time when our spiritual natures were dominant, and we were still in a state of oneness with the universal spirit. This will be explained in depth in a later chapter. But now, the spiritual nature within most people is so suppressed that their awareness of these things is blocked to one degree or another. Most people have lost so much awareness that they aren't even aware of the fact that they aren't aware that they are part of this one universe. But all people still have some awareness of their lost heritage deeply buried within them. It is just asleep or suppressed. This is one area where the ancient teachings are important because of what they can do to help put us back in touch. The words, teachings, and beliefs expressed in this book can be a catalyst for positive change and stimulate spiritual inspiration and awareness. They can also help you gain an awareness of the universal principles that are the fundamental guiding forces of all creation, including human life. Being exposed to the universal principles within the teachings may resonate and stir lost, buried feelings and memories from your suppressed spiritual nature. These feelings and memories are often first perceived as a sort of vague knowingness or awareness within you, at least those of you who are more receptive to awakening to their true nature and the reality of life. It's kind of like a person with amnesia regaining their memory as they hear and see familiar people and sights, although it's not so dramatic and obvious, and you don't need to fully understand the teachings intellectually in order to recover from your spiritual amnesia. Just reading them and grasping the spirit of them can still have an effect. The teachings may also act as a partial catalyst for your inner voice, the still silent voice of the universal spirit within you. Even though blocked, your inner voice will still react when exposed to the right catalyst, such as being presented with the spiritual truths of the universe. Thus, the teachings will stimulate it and get a positive response from it. However, the awakening or unblocking of the inner voice may not get a positive response from you in general. It all depends on the kind of person you are and have made yourself into, and whether or not you want it to remain blocked. So the subsequent reaction may be positive and one of joyfully quenching of a desperate thirst, which brings awakening, or the reaction may be negative and one of repulsion, anger, and deeper blocking. But one thing is certain: all people will react. Thus the book has the potential to inspire, awaken, and nurture in those who read it in their higher consciousness, or universal consciousness, and thus their own inner sense of spirituality. Some people might refer to universal consciousness as God consciousness, Christ consciousness, or enlightenment, etc. Having universal consciousness means many things other than being consciously one with and aware of all things in the universe, including the universal spirit. Most readers won't understand such abstract concepts at this time, and you can't ever really understand it until you achieve it. Universal consciousness will be explained more in depth later in the book, but fortunately, there is a very simple, easy way to understand what universal consciousness means to us and the world indirectly. You can understand it, recognize it, and appreciate how valuable and important it is by observing its effects. There are very real, tangible, and clearly identifiable changes that can be seen in the life of a person whose higher consciousness is awakening, or who has fully achieved universal consciousness. They are real-world changes that every decent person can relate to and agree are good. What are these changes, and how do they come about? Having an awakening of consciousness like we've just talked about results in truly becoming more spiritual. Let me pass on to you what my personal teacher, the adept monk Zayin, who I eventually affectionately called Father as we grew closer, said to me about spirituality one day. As you begin to expand your consciousness beyond yourself, you start realizing, not just believing or having faith, that there is more to life and the universe than meets the eye. Creation isn't just haphazard. There is one great something behind it all, and it pervades everything, including you, including all other people, animals, life, even the earth and the universe. As your universal spiritual consciousness continues to grow, you start understanding the underlying connection of everything more and more, until you eventually have the realization that others are actually part of you, and you a part of them, and you are all one. Brothers and sisters, all children of one universal God. As your spiritual consciousness grows, you also feel and manifest unselfish love, and the real world spiritual virtues that are reflections of unselfishly loving, caring, kindness, compassion, giving, and harmlessness. These are the things that are truly important, and the earmarks of true spirituality. Oddly enough, it works in both directions. Even though developing spiritual consciousness brings forth unselfish love also brings forth spiritual consciousness. In fact, one of the main things that develops spiritual consciousness is developing your unselfish love for others, feeling unselfish love, and practicing kindness, caring, giving, and harmlessness. So most importantly, the teachings have the potential to stimulate and inspire the reader to do what it takes to actually manifest in their lives these true spiritual qualities. If such a spiritual change takes place within you, then all the people you come in contact with as you walk through life will be better off from having known you. And then they too will have the opportunity to change and spread the beauty of unselfish love to others still, and on, like multiple ripples in a pond that go on, from throwing just one rock. Your unselfish love can make you a part of and a vehicle for the universal spirit as it moves through you, us, and thus throughout the world. Spiritual knowledge versus goodness. I'd attained a good deal of spiritual knowledge from all the reading I did as a teenager, but I was finding out that most of it was more of an impediment to my growth than an aid. An early course by the elder monk Enoch burst the bubble of my intellectual wisdom. Just as I was thinking to myself about how much I already knew, and how I could really probably skip many of the courses, Enoch started his lecture like this. Many people place too much importance on spiritual knowledge itself, and don't concentrate first on the basics of simple goodness, such as the virtues of unselfish love. Knowledge is meaningless without this. Using imagination and visualization, we can make a mental illustration that clearly demonstrates this. There is an ancient technique that can help you perceive, understand, and contemplate the value and impact of a person's character. We'll use this technique to compare the value of knowledge as opposed to goodness. Here's how it works. Think about a person's qualities and traits, and then imagine what the world would be like if it were entirely populated by and run by billions of identical duplicates of that one person. Keep in mind that if the entire world is populated by so-and-so's duplicates, some of them will also be in powerful political positions. There is an old saying, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Having power tends to nurture the darkness within people. Even a little separateness and selfishness is like a dormant cancer that can grow unchecked when fed by power. Some people behave well when they've been held in check by lack of wealth, lack of position of power, and constrained by society's moral standards and laws. So, when you imagine a world full of so-and-sos, you need to consider what they might become if they were also in all the various positions of power: police, judges, head officers of giant corporations, presidents, kings, and queens. You get the idea. The overall feeling and image you get of an imaginary world populated by any given individual will give you invaluable insight about them. So, for our knowledge versus goodness contemplation, let's think about what it would be like in two different imaginary worlds. In this case, we don't actually know the people involved, but we can still use the technique to help us understand the comparison. Let's say the first world is entirely populated by duplicates of the one person with the most and greatest spiritual knowledge on earth. Keep in mind that this person is still basically selfish, as most people are. Thus, they may be nice and friendly when things are going their way, and when nothing is required or asked of them. But these clones aren't unselfishly loving, and have spent their time and energy more on acquiring spiritual knowledge, instead of focusing on developing and practicing kindness and harmlessness above all else. Thus their world is full of people that aren't particularly kind, are definitely not harmless, happy, etc., and likewise, the population is definitely not self-sacrificing when another person is in need. Yet they are all egoed out, each person thinking they are very wise and know it all. So world number 1 is still full of iniquities and injustices of all kinds, still has children starving to death needlessly, still has torture, wars, and all kinds of other evils, problems and destructions that go along with a look out for number 1, dog-eat-dog world. I know those of you here don't want to live in that world, and many other people don't either. Yet, isn't it virtually the same as the outside world is that we have now? So how useful is great spiritual knowledge alone? For our second imaginary world, let's think about what the world would be if it were entirely populated by duplicates of one really good person. Someone with little knowledge, but with a good heart. Someone who is compassionate, kind, and harmless, and really cares about others. And they also have an attitude of live and let live, regardless of what others believe, think, and do, as long as they don't hurt someone else. That's not too much to ask, is it? Now, wouldn't this world be an incredibly better world than the one that people live in now? It would obviously be a beautiful, happy place. No starvation, no hurt, no war, no economic or physical enslavement, and no infringement on freedom. So even in regard to the practical aspects of day-to-day life and the condition of the world in general, isn't it obvious that the virtues of kindness and giving are far better and truly spiritual than any spiritual knowledge? And just imagine an entire world populated by unselfishly loving, enlightened beings. It would be paradise, heaven on earth. Spirituality requires more than spiritual knowledge. All people have some knowledge about God and goodness. Everyone was raised with the beliefs and examples of whomever raised them, and even if they were abused and raised by Satanists or atheists, they still learned about the concepts of God and goodness. But as they grew up, many people gained further knowledge of these things. Some read books about it. Some joined religions and learned their spiritual and moral teachings. But the problem is, there are a lot of people out there who have a great deal of spiritual knowledge, yet they just aren't spiritual. They don't think or behave as a spiritually conscious being would. Why, Enoch? How can someone learn all these things and not really change? Let's use an analogy in which water represents universal consciousness, unselfish love, and true spirituality. Just like the old saying that you can lead a camel to water, but you can't make him drink. And you can lead a spiritually dry person to the spiritual water, give it to them, point it out and say, water, but you can't make them drink. Many spiritual, knowledgeable people already have knowledge about this water, and they know where it is inside them. So when you point it out to them, they will usually say, I know, as if they really have it within them. Sure, they know. That's the problem. They only know. They can hear you tell them about the water and show it to them, and they recognize the water. They may even be able to tell other people about the water. They may even preach about it. All because they have the knowledge of it. But what have they done with the knowledge of water themselves? They've developed a spiritual ego. They impress themselves and others with their knowledge, but they are still spiritually dry. Just having the knowledge of the water is not sufficient. They must drink it in somehow, become one with it, and simultaneously share it by giving it all away for others. Just sharing the knowledge of water to those in the middle of the Sahara who need a drink does no one any good, unless you actually have the water to share also. All righty. I think I'm going to take a little break here and put on some music, and I'll see you on the other side.